Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well on this terrific Tuesday. You're looking absolutely amazing, by the way, and I'm going to get straight into the meat and potatoes, as I know that you're probably busy and you haven't got lots of stuff to do, and we've got a little bit to get through, but we're going to go on a little bit of a journey. We're going to go back to the beginning of the Idaho 4 case and look at one specific question, and that is, was the Idaho 4 victims, were they targeted? And why it's incredibly important to understand if that was indeed the fact. And look, again, let's delve back. Let's go on this. Let's go on this wander back, shall we? So this is from the 2nd of December, and it says Idaho student murders: the things we still don't know. And obviously, this is just from a media perspective, and it could be argued that even this far down the track, there is a lot that we still don't know. But there are some important things here. So questions continue to swirl around the grisly slaying of 4 Idaho University students found dead on 13th of November, with no suspect named or arrests made. The students are believed to have been asleep in their beds when they were stabbed to death, and that's not the case. We know that's not the case, but right back then, that was seemingly being suggested, and that is the picture that they wanted to paint, and is kind of stuck in a lot of people's minds. There's still people who believe that they are all asleep, and it simply wasn't the case. Officials have reversed course on several aspects of the probe, including about whether the attack was targeted. And here, this little bit here is the bane of contention, isn't it? Officials have reversed course on several aspects of the probe, including about whether the attack was targeted. And why is that important, right? This is why it's important, because from the very start, you have to ask yourself a question, that is, was saying that the attack was targeted, was that a knee-jerk reaction to just try and stem any fear? You know, it could almost be an excuse. I'm going to put that out there and say, look, we don't know. Maybe that was just a knee-jerk reaction to say, look, it's target. You don't have to worry because this was a target attack. The people who were killed in this attack were the people who were meant to die, because that's ultimately what they're saying. When you say that an attack is targeted, you've got a problem. So the reason why you have to kind of delve more into this is, you look at behaviour and you look at what law enforcement did, and you think to yourself, hold on a second, because if this wasn't targeted, if this wasn't an attack that they considered targeted, then wouldn't they rarely have turned around and said, we have a killer on the loose, we do not know what is going on here, and for your own safety do this, do that, and do the other to protect yourselves? And then you kind of think to yourself, well, Did they do that? Did they ultimately say this is targeted, but just on the off chance, just make sure that you do this just to protect yourself in case we're wrong? So that's by and by. The point being, was the attack targeted, and what made them think that the attack was targeted? Was something going on? Did something reveal itself in the early stages of the case that would lead them to believe this was targeted? Like a specific car being seen that was tied into the area, or that we knew that there was multiple complaints of this house. It was very likely that there could potentially be issues surrounding 1122 King Road that could have resulted in an attack. Was there something going on the peripheral of these individuals that could be, so we say, misconstrued as a reason to assume that there was something that happened off the back end of that, like narcotics, for instance, And like I will say, narcotics has never been my primary thing here. It's never been. I'm not saying that's not the case. It's not my primary thing, because there are other things happening and at play here that I feel make as much sense as. So we say that, like the fact that we have been told that there was a fight, for instance. Now, Steve Gonsalves, I'm pretty sure Steve Gonsalves knew about this fight, and he even had his suspicions early doors of Jack DeCoeur, to the point where he would get him, as far as we're aware, and this comes from the horse's mouth, that he would get him to strip off so he could check him for injuries. And I think to myself, why would you want to check in for injuries? Is that because the information that you knew would lead you to believe that the person who did this had sustained injuries, for instance, and you wanted to make sure? I don't know. Because what we do know is Brian Kohberger hadn't sustained any injuries, because he would go for a medical in the aftermath of this crime just to make sure that it was documented that he was free from injury. Again, this is just stuff that's out there. And you can't pick and choose what you want to believe. Do you know what I mean? If you want to believe that Brian Kohberger was stargazing on the night that this happened and the sky was cloudy and that's why it's a shit alibi, then you've also got to take into consideration that Brian Kohberger would go and get himself checked over and be free from injuries. You would also have to believe that he is, in fact, a germaphobe, so would go nowhere near anything that could put him in that, that predicament of dealing with potential germs. Or a vegan, so he wouldn't be dealing with leather, for instance, and things like that, and wouldn't be chopping up meat. Couldn't fillet a fish, remember. But the targeted aspect of this, why is it so important? Because if this attack was targeted, then it means that the person who did this had to have a connection to that house. Now, very early on, they wanted you to believe that Brian Kohberger was stalking these. That was the thing that was going to form one of the foundations of the PCA, to tell you that this was a person who had committed this crime. On the night he committed this crime, he switched his phone off to conceal where he was. And then on other times when he was surveilling the area, he would leave his phone on. So we know that he was surveilling the area because he left his phone on, so we can tell you that he was there 12 times. But that this was to tell you that he was a stalker. He was surveillance, stalking, same thing. Surveillance, stalking, same thing. So this is the key, you see, because Brian Kohberger, he is somebody who they're now trying to tell you does, in fact, have a connection to 1122 King Road. So this whole targeted scenario, he was stalking, he was watching the house. Steve Gonsalves comes on board and he tells you that Brian Kohberger was close to the house, he was touching the Wi-Fi. Do you see what I mean? Every single person around this case is trying to push the same picture, and that is that this was a targeted situation. So then you have to consider, okay, then if it was target, so who was the target? Was all of them the target then? Were they equally the target? The house was the target. So if it was the house, then why wouldn't somebody go into the house and go in every single room, and just go through the entire place and make sure that everybody in that house was dead? Every single person. Kick down the doors. I've said this before. Whoever went and done this crime, what did they know? That there was no locks on the door? That they would just be able to walk into this student house and be able to what? And this is important to understand. Did they know that the back door was going to be unlocked, that they could just walk into this place, or did they expect that they'd have to break in? So did they have a crowbar? Did they not have a crowbar? Did they use the K-bar knife to jimmy the door, or did they think they were going to have to do that? These are all important things to consider, because that would lead you to believe that quite possibly the person who did this must have been in that house prior to the crime. They must have understood that when they got into the house, the doors wouldn't be locked. Who was in what room? This is why these questions are so important. That's why this is so important, and what people are not taking into consideration. Well, not some people will, but have you truly stepped back and thought about the mechanics of the crime itself? The actual doing of the crime, how quickly it was done, and what things would have had to have been taken into consideration had they have had no connection to this property whatsoever. We've spoken briefly on the fact of how many cars were outside, and how would the person, again, if this was a stranger who was, how would they have known how many people were in there? Targeting individuals, being targeted. This is why this makes sense, because if this was a crime that was indeed targeted, and perhaps Xana and Ethan were targeted because there happened to be something that had happened earlier on in the night, and then somebody entered that home after them, and then something happened, and then it roused other people in the house, and the rest is history, and you have Maddie and Kaylee that then become collateral damage. And then you've got two individuals who survive it because they were never going to be attacked. They weren't targets. The people who were killed first They were the targets, and the collateral were those that heard and potentially came out of the house or come out of their room to see what was going on. We already know, or we could say we already know, that the noises from above were heard because Dylan Mortensen heard noises. Did she not? Did she not? Or did she hear noises from across the hall? There's so many questions around this, but the question of why was this targeted and why law enforcement reversed on that as well. Why did they turn around and say this wasn't targeted? All of a sudden it's not targeted. 1 minute it is, 1 minute it isn't. Why do you then want to turn around and say, well, actually, it might not be targeted? Because you then understand that by following the targeted route, it leads you in a specific direction. It means that you have to start looking at certain things that perhaps happened on that night, or definitely happened on that night, and you have to start looking at specific people. And this all constantly leads back to the fact that there are people around this crime and there is blood around this crime that is being hidden, being concealed. And is it being concealed because that targeted route and thinking along the lines of who was the target, why were they targeted, leads you in a certain direction? And I hear people, and I'll leave you on this, loads of people turn around and say, why Brian Kohberger? Why Brian Kohberger then? Well, because Brian Kohberger has no connection to it. And they've proven that he's got no connection to it. Absolutely nothing. There is no connection to the University of Idaho, to Moscow, Idaho. There is no connection. He was a complete outsider. He was this alien loner from out of the area, from Pennsylvania, who came over to Washington State University to do the studies that he was doing, and he just happened to be a weirdo and came here and done this heinous crime. He was perfect. He was absolutely perfect. That's why. He just made the perfect individual to pin this crime on. And if you can't see that, I can't help you. But anyway, let me know down below what you think. Was this targeted? And if it was targeted and you really want to go down that rabbit hole, then who does it lead you to? Love you all. Mwah.